At the family dinner, Dad said, "You're out. It's time he takes over." Mom nodded. I replied, "Understood. I'll pack my things and my financial lifeline." That night, I left them with nothing. The air in my parents' dining room in Albuquerque was so thick you could choke on it. We were sitting around the heavy oak table, the same one where we had celebrated every Thanksgiving and Christmas since I was a kid. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic mashed potatoes filled the room, but my stomach was tied in a knot so tight I couldn't have choked down a single bite if I tried. I was 32 years old, and for the past 6 years, I had been the absolute backbone of our family's small real estate company. I was the blood, the sweat, and the solitary reason the doors were still open. But tonight, none of that mattered. My dad cleared his throat, the sound sharp and echoing against the walls. He set his fork down deliberately, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and looked me dead in the eye. His expression was a wall of cold stone. "Nadine," he said, his voice completely level, completely devoid of any affection. "We think it is best you step away from the company for now. You're out. It is time Derek takes over." My mother sat next to him. She did not look at me. She just stared down at her plate, her hands folded tightly in her lap, and offered a slow, deliberate nod of agreement. Across the table, my Aunt Valerie leaned back in her chair, a smug, tight-lipped smile spreading across her face. And then there was Derek, my older brother. He sat there next to his girlfriend, Simone, swirling his wine glass, looking like he had just won the lottery. He didn't say a word, but the smirk on his face told me everything I needed to know. Time seemed to stop. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "You're out." Just like that. After 6 years of bleeding myself dry, of working 60-hour weeks, of sacrificing my own future to keep their legacy afloat, I was being dismissed. Tossed out with the trash so the golden child could step in and claim the throne. I looked at the four of them, really looked at them, and something inside my chest went perfectly still. It was not a violent snap. It was not a fiery explosion of anger. It was a cold, quiet realization. The trap had finally sprung. The psychological cage I had been living in for over half a decade suddenly became completely visible to me. To understand how we got to this freezing, heartless moment over a plate of roasted chicken, I have to take you back. I have to explain how I willingly bought my own ticket to this nightmare, thinking I was doing the noble thing, thinking I was saving my family. 6 years ago, I was 26, full of energy and completely naive. Our family real estate business was not a legacy. It was a sinking ship taking on water faster than anyone could bail it out. We had a small office on Central Avenue, a handful of stale listings, and a mountain of debt that my parents had been desperately ignoring. Neither my dad nor my mom had any real interest in running the day-to-day operations anymore. They liked the title of being business owners, but they absolutely hated the grind. Aunt Valerie, who owned a small percentage of the shares, was even worse. She liked to collect the dividends when times were good, but the moment the market shifted, she was completely absent. Then came the family meeting. I will never forget the look of sheer panic masked as parental trust. They basically handed me the keys to a failing enterprise and said, "You are good with numbers, Nadine. You handle it. We believe in you." They used my sense of duty, my love for them, to chain me to the radiator of a burning building. And like an absolute fool, I said yes. I did not just take over the management. I became their life support machine. During my first year, the company account hit zero. We were going to lose the office. The landlord was threatening eviction. My parents just shrugged, looked exhausted, and told me to figure it out. So I did. I marched down to my personal bank, my stomach twisting into a painful knot, and I withdrew $40,000 from my own savings. It was every dime I had scraped together since college. I used my own money to pay the back rent, cover the property taxes, and keep the lights on. I did not take a single penny of salary for the first 2 years. Not 1 cent. Every time I closed a deal, every commission I earned went straight back into the company to pay our contractors and cover overhead. I lived in a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment that smelled faintly of old carpet and desperation. I lived on cheap ramen noodles and instant coffee. I sacrificed my 20s, my social life, my sleep, and my sanity. I convinced myself that this was what families do. We sacrifice. We build together. I believed that my sweat equity and my financial bleeding were securing my place at the table. But the truth was, I wasn't building a future. I was building a safety net for a family that viewed me as nothing more than an appliance. A machine you plug in to generate cash. While I was drowning in spreadsheets and tax documents until 2 in the morning, my brother Derek was living in a completely different reality. Derek was the golden child. He was charming, tall, with an easy smile that could talk an angry client off a ledge, but he possessed the work ethic of a sloth. He held the title of vice president, a completely empty designation that my parents gave him so he would feel important. Derek treated our struggling company like his own personal ATM. He would stroll into the office at 11 in the morning, grab a coffee, chat with the receptionist, and leave by 2 in the afternoon. And yet, when he needed cash, the family expectation was that I would simply provide it. I remember the day he burst into my cramped office, flashing a glossy brochure for a brand new, fully loaded truck. He needed a $15,000 down payment. When I told him the company was barely scraping by, he threw a tantrum. He ran to our parents, claiming he needed a professional vehicle to impress clients. My dad called me, his voice soft but heavy with that manipulative disappointment. "Just make it work, Nadine. He is your brother. He is trying." So, I made it work. I delayed paying myself again and cut a check for $15,000. But the truck was just the beginning. The absolute worst of it was Vegas. Derek had a gambling problem that nobody in the family was allowed to call a gambling problem. Over the course of 3 years, I bailed him out of debts totaling $28,000. $28,000 of hard-earned cash that could have grown the business vanished onto blackjack tables and roulette wheels. Whenever I tried to raise the alarm, whenever I brought the bank statements to my parents, showing them the massive hemorrhage of funds, they would brush it off. "He is young, Nadine," my mother would sigh, staring out the window. "He will figure it out. You need to be more supportive." Supportive. That was the word they used to weaponize my guilt. I wasn't a sister. I was a hostage negotiator, constantly paying the ransom to keep Derek from ruining our last name. And every time I paid, I dug my own emotional grave a little deeper. By year 4, the fatigue was rotting my bones. But I kept pushing because I genuinely believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I just proved my undeniable value, they would finally respect me. I found a massive opportunity, a rundown, abandoned property in the Northeast Heights. It was a classic fixer-upper, but the company account was too thin to secure the deal. I knew this was a gold mine, so I took the leap. I drained another $30,000 from my personal, high-yield savings account to secure the purchase. It was my money, my risk, my endless nights spent dealing with unreliable plumbers and cheap drywall contractors while breathing in decades of dust. When the property finally sold 6 months later, it generated a clean $60,000 profit. It was the biggest win the company had seen in a decade. I felt a surge of pride, thinking this would be the turning point. But the money did not go into my pocket. It went straight into the company accounts to cover a massive backlog of payroll and back taxes that my parents had somehow forgotten to mention to me. I didn't even get a thank you. But the absolute breaking point of that deal was Derek. 2 days after the funds cleared, Derek sauntered into my office, smelling of expensive cologne, and casually asked for a $10,000 bonus. He said he needed to take Simone on a luxury trip to Miami because he was feeling burnout. Burnout from what? The man hadn't lifted a single finger on the Northeast Heights project. He didn't know the address, let alone the color of the paint. For the first time in 4 years, I looked at him, gripped the edge of my desk, and said, "No. Absolutely not." Derek stared at me like I had just slapped him across the face. His charming smile vanished, replaced by a vicious, entitled sneer. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. That night, the silent treatment began. The entire family froze me out. No one called. No one texted. It was a coordinated, psychological punishment designed to break my spirit and force me back into compliance. The freeze-out ended a week later when the barrage of gaslighting began. Aunt Valerie was the first to attack. She cornered me at a family barbecue, sipping her mimosa, and delivered her favorite line. "You know, Nadine, you're getting way too controlling with the finances. You act like it is only your money. You're strangling the family spirit." Strangling the family spirit. I was the only thing keeping the family spirit from filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. But she said it with such conviction, such absolute certainty, that I actually went home and stared at my ceiling, wondering if I was the villain. That is what gaslighting does to you. It makes you doubt your own sanity. I was suffering from severe emotional bankruptcy. I was giving everything and receiving absolutely nothing in return, not even basic human decency. I decided to do a full audit of Derek's company credit card for the past year. What I found made me physically sick. He wasn't just wasting money, he was living like a minor celebrity on my dime. There were charges for high-end steakhouses, VIP sections at nightclubs, and a brand new designer watch that cost more than my car. He was expensing his lavish life while I was debating whether I could afford to add extra chicken to my salad at the grocery store. I printed the statements, highlighted the ridiculous charges in bright yellow, and drove straight to my parents' house. I laid the papers on the kitchen counter in front of my dad. I was shaking with anger, demanding that we cut off Derek's card. My dad didn't even look at the numbers. He just rubbed his temples, looked at me with deep annoyance, and said, "Nadine, please. Just let it go. Cover the bill and keep the peace. I cannot deal with his drama right now. Keep the peace." That was their mantra. My dad was perfectly willing to let me drown in financial stress as long as he didn't have to have an uncomfortable conversation with his son. They were enabling a parasite and using my lifeblood to feed him. I had one final, desperate attempt to make them see reality. A month before that infamous dinner, I invited my mom to a quiet coffee shop downtown. I brought my laptop and a thick folder of spreadsheets. I had spent 3 days compiling the data. The numbers were undeniable. I laid out the charts showing that over the last 6 years, I had personally funded 90% of the company's operating costs. My total personal investment, my cash poured into their legacy, sat at over $120,000. I pushed the paper across the table. "Mom, look at this," I pleaded, my voice cracking just a little. "I am empty. I have nothing left. I need you guys to acknowledge what I am carrying. I need Derek to step up or step out. I cannot be the only one holding this up." My mother picked up her latte, took a slow sip, and glanced at the paper for maybe 3 seconds. Her eyes glazed over. She didn't see the $120,000. She didn't see my exhaustion. She just saw an inconvenience. She set the paper down, patted my hand with cold, condescending sympathy, and said, "I know you work hard, sweetie. But anyway, did Derek tell you about his new side hustle? He wants to start a luxury car detailing business. I really think this is the one that will take off. He just needs a little seed money." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was as if I was screaming underwater, and she was sitting on a boat right above me, complaining about the weather. She didn't care. She truly, fundamentally, did not care about my sacrifices. I was not a daughter to her. I was a utility. I was the plumbing. You only notice the plumbing when it stops working, and even then, you just want to kick it until the water flows again. I sat back in my chair, the noise of the coffee shop fading into a dull hum. A profound, chilling silence settled over my heart. That was the moment the loyal, desperate daughter died. That was the moment I started to detach. I packed up my spreadsheets, smiled a hollow smile, and paid the bill. I knew, with absolute certainty, that the end was coming. I just didn't realize they were planning to execute me at the dinner table. Before we get into the explosive fallout and the moment I finally struck back, if you are enjoying this story of ultimate family revenge, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, drop a comment below with the name of the city you are watching from right now. Every comment helps push this video to more people who love a good drama. Thank you so much. Now let's get back to the chaos. So, let us go right back to that dinner table. The roasted chicken was getting cold, and the silence in the room was absolute deafening. My dad had just delivered his incredibly cold ultimatum. I was out, and Derek was taking over. I sat there with my fork suspended halfway between my plate and my mouth, letting the words sink into my skin. Across the table, Derek was not even trying to hide his victory. He leaned back, casually draped his arm over the back of Simone's chair, and gave me this infuriating, arrogant little smirk. Simone, whom he had been dating for maybe 6 months, was looking at me with thinly veiled pity, like I was some tragic employee who had just been rightfully fired for incompetence. Aunt Valerie, sitting to my left, could not resist twisting the knife. She always had to have the last word. "Do not be dramatic about this, Nadine," Valerie chimed in, her tone dripping with that fake, sugary concern she always used to mask her cruelty. "You have been running things like it is your own little dictatorship. You're exhausted, we can all see it. You are single, you have no life outside that office. It is time your brother took the reins. He has the vision to take the company to the next level. He needs this chance to grow. He was 34 years old and still needed his mommy to remind him to pay his car insurance. But as I looked around that table at the 4 faces staring back at me with absolutely zero remorse, the final puzzle piece clicked into place. My emotional bankruptcy was complete, but my logical brain suddenly woke up and saw the entire chessboard. They did not want me out because I was tired. They did not want me out because I was controlling. They wanted me out because the company was finally, after 6 years of my agonizing labor, actually turning a consistent profit. I had paid down the massive debts. I had built a solid roster of reliable clients. The accounts were healthy. The heavy lifting was done. They had let me drag the sled all the way up the mountain, and now that we were at the peak, they wanted to kick me off so Derek could enjoy the ride down. It was an orchestrated ambush, designed to harvest the fruits of my suffering. And the wildest part? They genuinely expected me to just cry, nod, and hand over the keys. They expected the loyal, battered daughter to quietly accept her punishment and fade into the background, leaving the treasury wide open for Derek to loot. I did not scream. I did not cry. Something inside my chest, a wire that had been stretched to its absolute breaking point for 6 long years, finally snapped. It was not a violent, fiery explosion. It was a cold, perfectly quiet release of tension. The paralyzing grip of the sunk cost fallacy simply evaporated. I looked at my dad, then at my mom, then at Valerie, and finally at Derek's smug face. I set my fork down on my plate with a soft, deliberate clink. I took a slow, deep breath, smoothing my napkin and placing it neatly on the table. My voice, when I finally spoke, was so eerily calm and steady that it actually made my mother flinch. "Understood," I said, looking right into my father's eyes. "I will respect your decision." The collective sigh of relief around the table was almost comical. My dad's shoulders dropped. Valerie smiled her smug little smile again. Derek actually let out a short, victorious breath. They thought they had won. They thought the surgical extraction of the workhorse was a complete success. I pushed my chair back, the wood scraping loudly against the dining room floor, and stood up. I looked down at them one last time, feeling absolutely nothing but a glorious, freezing clarity. "But you should know," I added, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel, "that if my management is out, my financial lifeline is out, too. I will be taking my personal investments with me." The room went completely, terrifyingly still. The smugness vanished from Derek's face, replaced by a sudden, blank confusion. My mom's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. My dad's eyes widened, the realization hitting him like a freight train. "What exactly do you mean, Nadine?" Aunt Valerie asked, her voice suddenly tight and defensive. "I mean exactly what I said," I replied, grabbing my purse from the back of the chair. "I have funded 90% of this company's operations out of my own pocket for 6 years. Every payroll, every lease payment, every emergency fund. If I am no longer part of this company, my money is no longer part of this company. Good luck with the vision, Derek." Without waiting for another word, I turned around and walked out of the dining room. I heard the frantic scraping of chairs and my dad yelling my name as I reached the front door, but I didn't even pause. I walked out into the cool Albuquerque night, got into my car, and drove away, leaving them sitting at the table with the absolute ghost of their ruined future. I drove back to my cramped, dimly lit one-bedroom apartment. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't pour a glass of wine. I didn't even take off my coat. I walked straight to my small kitchen table, flipped open my laptop, and connected to the internet. My hands were perfectly steady. My heart was beating at a normal, calm rhythm. I felt like a forensic accountant executing a flawless, completely legal demolition. For 6 years, I had been meticulous. Because my family treated me like garbage, my only defense mechanism had been paperwork. Every single time I transferred my personal savings to keep the company afloat, from that very first $40,000 to the $30,000 for the Northeast Heights lot, and all the thousands in between to cover Derek's ridiculous expenses, I had documented it. I did not just wire money blindly. I had officially recorded every single cent in the company ledgers as a shareholder loan payable on demand. I had drafted the promissory notes, and because my dad and Valerie were too lazy to ever read the documents I put in front of them during our annual meetings, they had signed them. Legally, the company owed me a massive, undeniable debt. And tonight, I was calling in the loan. I logged into the company's master banking portal. The screen glowed in the dark room, displaying the healthy operating balance I had bled myself to build. It was sitting right around $130,000. Money earmarked for the upcoming quarterly property taxes, 2 major escrow deposits, contractor payroll, and the lease for our Central Avenue office. I opened a second tab and logged into my personal checking account. Then I began the process. I didn't do it all at once to avoid triggering an automatic fraud freeze from the bank's algorithm. I initiated a series of calculated, authorized wire transfers. I attached the corresponding, digitally signed promissory notes to each transaction memo. Repayment of shareholder loan year 1. Transfer. Repayment of shareholder loan year 4. Transfer. Reimbursement for corporate debt. Transfer. I sat there in the quiet hum of my refrigerator, watching the progress bars fill up. It took exactly 14 minutes. 14 minutes to dismantle 6 years of exploitation. When I was finished, I refreshed the company's master account page. The balance stared back at me, $2,400. I had successfully and legally clawed back exactly $120,000 of my own money. I had left them with just enough to cover the utility bills and maybe buy some printer paper. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing numbers. I waited for the guilt to hit me. I waited for that familiar, crushing weight of familial obligation to wrap around my throat and tell me I was a terrible daughter. But it never came. Instead, a wave of profound, intoxicating liberation washed over me. I was completely free. I closed the laptop, walked into my bedroom, and for the first time in over half a decade, I slept through the entire night without waking up in a cold sweat about the family business. The fallout was not just fast, it was violently spectacular. By 9 o'clock the next morning, the dominoes I had set up the night before started crashing down with terrifying speed. I woke up, made a fresh cup of coffee, and sat on my couch with my phone in my hand, watching the notifications roll in like a thunderstorm. The automated systems were the first to trigger. I got copied on an urgent email from our title company. A massive property deal for a downtown commercial condo had just fallen through because our escrow deposit wire had bounced due to insufficient funds. 10 minutes later, a second email arrived. The suburban lot deal we had been negotiating for 2 months was dead in the water for the exact same reason. By 10 o'clock, the human element realized what was happening. Our landlord on Central Avenue, who already hated us because of our history of late payments before I took over, tried to process our monthly automated rent check. It bounced. He immediately sent a furious, all-caps email threatening a 7-day notice to vacate the premises. The company, which I had held together with my own 2 hands for 6 brutal years, was literally evaporating in the span of a single morning, and I was just sitting there, sipping my coffee, not lifting a single finger to stop it. Then, the family panic began. My phone lit up with a text from my dad. It was frantic, the spelling atrocious, clearly typed by a man in total shock. Nadine, the bank accounts are frozen. Where's the operating capital? You cannot do this. We are losing the downtown deal. Put the money back right now. He did not apologize. He did not acknowledge that he had literally fired me the night before. He just demanded his safety net back. I stared at the message, feeling that cold, beautiful detachment. I typed out a single, 5-word response, hit send, and put the phone down. I respect your decision. An hour later, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it while washing my coffee mug. Her voice was trembling, thick with panic and that same old manipulation. Nadine, please, honey. You cannot let the business fail. We need it. Your brother needs it to survive. We can talk about this. Please, just wire the funds back before the landlord locks us out. She was literally pleading for her life, but she wasn't pleading for me. She was still pleading for Derek. She was begging me to set myself on fire so her golden child could stay warm. I deleted the voicemail. By noon, Derek's true colors finally showed. He didn't call to negotiate. He called to scream. I let that go to voicemail too. The recording was a masterpiece of entitled rage. You think you are so high and mighty, Nadine? You are screwing us all over. You are a thief. I am going to call the cops. You are destroying my company. You will regret this, you bitter, controlling. The rest of the message was just a string of profanities. He called it his company. The absolute delusion was staggering. He had never balanced a ledger, never dealt with a screaming contractor, never skipped a meal to pay the electric bill. But in his mind, it was his kingdom, and I had just stolen the crown jewels. I didn't reply to Derek. My absolute silence was louder and far more damaging than any argument I could have ever given him. They had wanted the steering wheel. Now they were driving the car straight off a cliff, and I was safely watching from the grandstands. By the third day, the family had transitioned from sheer panic to a coordinated smear campaign. Since I refused to answer their calls, they sent in the flying monkeys. A flying monkey, in psychological terms, is a third party manipulated by a toxic person to do their bidding, usually to guilt-trip the victim back into compliance. Aunt Valerie was the lead attacker. She managed to leave a 3-minute voicemail on my phone that was a masterclass in gaslighting. Nadine, the entire family is disgusted with your selfish behavior. Her voice dripped with condescension through the speaker. This company is our family's legacy. Your grandfather started it. You are acting like a spoiled child throwing a tantrum just because your brother got a promotion. You are destroying generations of hard work because of your massive ego. You need to return the family funds immediately before I involve lawyers. Legacy. The word made me want to laugh until I threw up. I had been the one paying for that so-called legacy with my youth and my savings. She hadn't lifted a finger to help the business in a decade, but suddenly she was the defender of the family honor. I didn't block her number, though. I wanted to keep the lines open just to watch them unravel. I wanted the digital record of their desperation. Then came Cousin Bethany. She was the quiet one, the peacemaker who always stayed out of the drama. She sent me a long, hesitant text message. Nadine, Aunt Valerie is going crazy. She says you stole all the money and the office is getting shut down. Dad and Mom are crying. I know you're mad, but can't you just meet with them? This is really bad. Please, just talk to them. I felt a slight pang of sympathy for Bethany. She was being used. They were likely sitting in her living room, crying fake tears, forcing her to play the messenger because they knew I actually liked her. But I had to hold my boundary of absolute no contact. If I gave them an inch, they would drag me right back into the swamp. I replied to Bethany with the same cold mantra. Bethany, I love you, but stay out of this. They made their choice. I respect their decision. By the end of that first week, the physical reality of their failure set in. Our receptionist, a sweet woman named Maria, texted me apologizing, saying she had to quit because her paycheck had bounced. 2 days after that, the landlord officially padlocked the doors of the Central Avenue office. The company website went dark because the hosting bill, tied to the corporate card I had deactivated, failed to process. The business was dead. It was a complete, humiliating collapse. And I thought, sitting in my apartment, that this was the end of the story. I thought justice had been served. I was so incredibly wrong. The real nightmare had not even started. 2 weeks after the company imploded, the dust had somewhat settled. I was in the middle of updating my resume, preparing to move on with my life, when I received a very strange email. It was an automated notification from the commercial bank we used for major real estate transactions. The subject line read, "Transaction complete. Northeast Heights parcel. Final closing documents." I frowned, staring at the screen. That was impossible. The Northeast Heights lot was the property I had personally secured with my own $30,000 4 years ago. It had a small, dilapidated commercial structure on it, and I had been holding onto it, waiting for the zoning laws to change so we could flip it for a massive premium. The title was held under the company's name, but I was the sole personal guarantor on the original loan documents, which is why the bank's automated system had CC'd my old personal email address. My heart started to beat a little faster as I clicked on the attached PDF. It was a finalized bill of sale and a wire transfer confirmation. The lot had been sold. It had been sold for $50,000 to a shell LLC I did not recognize. But that wasn't the detail that made the blood freeze in my veins. I scrolled down to the signature page. There, on the line marked Authorized Managing Partner, was my signature. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath catching in my throat. It was my name, but the loops were wrong. The pressure of the pen was hesitant. It was a forgery. And right below it, acting as the secondary witness and the receiving party for the wire transfer, were 2 signatures I recognized instantly. Derek and his girlfriend, Simone. A cold, terrifying realization washed over me. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This wasn't about a lazy brother or manipulative parents. This was a felony. This was grand larceny and corporate fraud. The panic only lasted for about 10 seconds. Then, the forensic accountant in me took over. I immediately called the commercial bank's fraud department. Because I was still legally listed as a guarantor, they were obligated to speak with me. I bypassed the low-level clerks and demanded a supervisor. I informed them that the signature was forged and requested the routing information for the $50,000 wire transfer. It took 2 hours of aggressive phone calls, but I finally got the documentation. The $50,000 had not gone into any company account. It had been routed directly into a private, newly established joint checking account. The account holders? Derek and Simone. They had literally stolen a piece of real estate I bought with my own cash, forged my name on federal banking documents, and pocketed the money. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. But I needed more. I needed to know the timeline. I needed to know exactly how deep this rot went. I spent the next 48 hours doing a deep dive into the company's digital archives. Before I had left, I had backed up the entire email server to an external hard drive. It was standard protocol for me, but it turned out to be the most important thing I had ever done. I ran a search query for the address of the Northeast Heights lot, filtering for emails sent by Derek or Simone. I found a deleted folder that Derek thought he had wiped clean. He was incredibly stupid. He didn't realize that corporate servers keep shadow copies of deleted items for 30 days. I sat in the dark glow of my monitor, reading through the recovered email threads, and the true, horrifying reality of my family was laid bare. Derek and Simone had been planning this for months. Simone, it turned out, worked as a paralegal and knew exactly how to draft a fake bill of sale and bypass the standard notary requirements using a shady contact she had. But the most devastating email was not from Derek or Simone. It was an email from Derek to my father, dated exactly 4 weeks before the infamous family dinner. The email read, "Dad, the paperwork for the Heights lot is moving forward. Simone has the buyer lined up. We're going to clear the $50,000 by the end of the month. But we have a problem. Nadine is going to do the quarterly tax audit in 3 weeks. As soon as she checks the property ledger, she is going to see the lot is gone and the funds are missing. You have to get her out of the company before the 15th. We need to lock her out of the system so she doesn't see the transfer. My father's reply, sent from his iPad later that evening, was just 2 sentences. I understand. Your mother and I will handle Nadine at dinner on Sunday. Just make sure the money is secure. I pushed myself away from the desk, my hands shaking so violently I knocked over a glass of water. It shattered on the floor, but I barely heard it. The family dinner. The ultimatum. The sudden decision that I was too controlling and needed to step down. None of it was about Derek needing a chance to grow. None of it was about my management style. It was a meticulously coordinated cover-up. My parents knew their son was committing a felony. They knew he was stealing an asset that I had personally funded. And instead of stopping him, instead of protecting their daughter, they conspired with him. They orchestrated that brutal, emotionally devastating dinner to fire me and lock me out of the financial servers just days before I would have discovered their crime. They were willing to destroy my career and my mental health just to help Derek get away with stealing $50,000. The betrayal was so absolute, so fundamentally evil, that it transcended anger. It was a total paradigm shift. These people were not my family. They were a criminal syndicate, and I was the mark they had been bleeding dry. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I meticulously printed out every single email, every forged signature, every wire transfer routing number. I placed them carefully into a thick manila folder. They thought they had pushed me out to cover their tracks. But all they had done was give me the exact ammunition I needed to burn their entire house of cards to the ground. I waited exactly 1 week. I let them marinate in the chaos of the ruined office and the bounced checks. Then my phone buzzed. It was Bethany again. Nadine, please. Things are horrible. The landlord is suing. Dad and Uncle are screaming at each other. They set up a family meeting at your parents' house tonight to figure out bankruptcy options. Aunt Valerie says if you don't show up, they are going to tell the lawyers you embezzled the money. You have to come defend yourself. Embezzled. The absolute, unmitigated gall of these people. I smiled, a tight, cold smile. I replied to Bethany. Tell them I will be there at 7. I arrived at my parents' house right on time. I walked through the front door without knocking. The living room looked exactly the same as it had for 30 years, but the atmosphere was toxic. My dad was pacing by the fireplace. My mom was sitting on the sofa, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Aunt Valerie stood by the window with her arms crossed, looking like a vulture waiting for something to die. Derek and Simone sat on the love seat, whispering to each other, looking stressed, but still holding on to that arrogant posture. Bethany sat quietly in the corner, looking miserable. When I walked in, carrying nothing but a manila folder, the room fell dead silent. Valerie was the first to attack, naturally. Well, look who finally decided to show up. Have you finished throwing your little tantrum, Nadine? Because the lawyers are getting involved, and you are going to be held responsible for. Shut up, Valerie, I said. My voice was not loud, but the absolute venom in it made her snap her mouth shut instantly. I didn't look at her again. I walked straight to the heavy oak coffee table in the center of the room and dropped the thick manila folder onto the glass top with a heavy thud. I am not here to discuss the company's bankruptcy, I said, my eyes panning across my parents and then locking onto Derek. I am here to discuss the $50,000 wire transfer from the unauthorized sale of the Northeast Heights property. Derek's face strained of all color in a fraction of a second. Simone physically flinched, her hand flying to her mouth. My dad stopped pacing, his entire body going rigid. I don't know what you are talking about, Derek stammered, his voice suddenly an octave higher. Really? I asked smoothly. I opened the folder and spread the documents out across the table like a dealer dealing a hand of blackjack. Because I have the final bill of sale right here, featuring a staggeringly amateur forgery of my signature. I also have the wire routing numbers showing exactly how the $50,000 bypassed the corporate accounts and landed directly in a joint checking account owned by Derek and Simone. You are insane, Simone blurted out, her voice shaking. Those are fake. They are subpoenaed records from the Commercial Fraud Division, Simone, I countered, not breaking eye contact. But that is not the best part. I pulled out the final stack of papers, the printed emails. I turned to look at my father, who was now gripping the mantelpiece like he was about to collapse. The best part is that I recovered the deleted server files, I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. I have the emails, Dad. The emails where Derek tells you about the forgery. The emails where he tells you that I am going to find out during the quarterly audit. And the email where you agree to orchestrate that little ambush at dinner to fire me and lock me out of the system before I could catch him. My mother let out a strangled gasp and buried her face in her hands. Valerie looked absolutely stunned, her eyes darting between my father and Derek, realizing for the first time that she had been backing the wrong horse. You conspired to commit felony fraud, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried perfectly across the room. You let him steal an asset I paid for, and you try to destroy my life to cover it up. You are all pathetic, parasitic criminals. My dad finally found his voice, weak and trembling. Nadine, please. He was in so much debt. The people he owed money to from Vegas, they were making threats. We had to do something. We are family. You lost the right to use that word, I fired back, gathering my folder and slipping it back under my arm. I have already submitted this entire dossier to the bank's fraud investigation unit, and my lawyer has forwarded copies to the district attorney. You wanted Derek in charge? Congratulations. He is fully in charge of the criminal fallout. Do not ever contact me again. I turned my back on them and walked out the door. I didn't hear a single voice call after me. There was only the sound of absolute, devastating ruin. I didn't stick around Albuquerque to watch the ashes fall. I hired a ruthless corporate attorney to legally sever my name from every single contract, lease, and remaining liability tied to the family business. It cost me $5,000 in legal fees, but it was the best money I ever spent. Once I was legally bulletproof, I packed up my tiny apartment, loaded my car, and drove north. I moved to Denver, Colorado, a city where nobody knew my last name and nobody expected me to bleed for them. Over the next few months, the updates trickled in through the legal grapevine. The karma was swift and absolutely brutal. The bank did exactly what I knew they would do. They opened a massive, relentless fraud investigation into the sale of the Northeast Heights lot. Because it involved federal wire transfers, it escalated quickly. Derek was hit with a massive civil lawsuit for misusing corporate assets and committing bank fraud. To avoid actual prison time, he was forced to liquidate everything he owned. His brand new truck was repossessed. Simone, seeing the sinking ship, packed her bags and vanished in the middle of the night, leaving him to face the music alone. Last I heard, he was working a minimum-wage retail job trying to pay off restitution. But the hardest hit fell on my parents. During the discovery phase of Derek's lawsuit, the forensic accountants found out how deeply in debt they really were. It turned out, years ago, they had secretly taken out a massive second mortgage on their house to cover some of Derek's earlier mistakes, relying entirely on my constant financial infusions to keep the payments afloat. When I took my $120,000 back and the company completely flatlined, they missed 3 consecutive mortgage payments. The bank showed absolutely no mercy. Foreclosure proceedings were initiated. They were forced to sell their beautiful, sprawling home, the house I grew up in, at a massive loss just to cover the debts. Bethany told me later that they had moved into a small, cramped rental apartment across town, struggling to make ends meet on their limited Social Security. They had sacrificed their loyal daughter to save the golden child, and in the end, they lost absolutely everything. 3 months into my new life in Denver, I was sitting in my new, sunlit condo, looking out at the mountains, when there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Uncle Harrison standing there. Harrison was my dad's older brother. He had completely estranged himself from the family over 20 years ago. He lived quietly on the outskirts of Albuquerque, and his name was rarely mentioned in our house. He looked at me, gave a soft, knowing smile, and said, "I heard about the explosion. Can I come in?" I made us some tea, and we sat on my balcony. For the next 3 hours, Harrison told me a story that chilled me to the bone. He told me about how, 25 years ago, my dad and Aunt Valerie had done the exact same thing to him. He had been the original workhorse, the one funding their early, foolish business ventures. They had bled him dry, manipulated him with guilt, and the moment he finally set a boundary and refused to sign over a property to my dad, they orchestrated a massive family blow-up and pushed him out. Toxic families don't change, Nadine, Uncle Harrison said, looking out at the horizon. They just find a new host to feed on. When I left, you became the host. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It is survival. You did the hardest thing in the world. You broke the generational curse. I am incredibly proud of you. Hearing those words from him, someone who truly understood the absolute madness I had survived, was the final piece of closure I needed. The guilt that I hadn't even realized I was still carrying completely dissolved in the mountain air. I am thriving now. I have a great job at a mid-sized firm where my work is actually respected and my paychecks go into my own bank account. I sleep deeply. I go hiking on the weekends. I have built a life that is entirely my own, completely free from the suffocating anchor of my toxic family. But sometimes, on a quiet Sunday, my phone will buzz. It will be a text from Bethany. She will mention that my parents' rental is cold, that my dad's health is failing, and that my mother cries all the time, living in deep, crushing regret. She never explicitly asks me to send money, but the implication hangs heavily in the air. I built a new life from the ashes of their betrayal, but sometimes Bethany still reaches out, hinting that my parents are living in regret and poverty. Part of me knows I did what I had to do to survive, but the other part wonders if letting them lose their home was too harsh. So, I have to ask you all, am I the villain for walking away with my money and letting their house of cards burn to the ground, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button for more daily stories. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. See you in the next video.